So I thought I'd say a few words about the making of the sausage and things that are good to know for users, about some of the quirks that go into the data generation process, but also to reflect a bit on what is actually knowable. And I think this may be important, especially if you're working in early warning and want to pick up the earlier signals to predict larger scale violence. So one way to think about this is to look at how the information propagates through the information ecosystem. And essentially, this is sort of a very stylized picture, sort of an ideal situation. But what you will find is that more newsworthy, more salient events travel further. So the participants in the events, of course, will know of all of them. The local media and NGOs will know of some of them, small events, and most or all of the massively violent events, because they are more newsworthy. There's no escaping them. They will travel, whereas a small protest with a few people may only be of interest to the people involved and their relatives and maybe someone else in their organization, and even local media won't report on it. And so information travels further the more newsworthy or salient it is. Of course, if it's a large peaceful protest, it will travel further, perhaps even all the way out to international media. This also, of course, means that you can't really measure peaceful protests with only using international media. It doesn't matter if you define your events all the way down to non-fatal peaceful protest. If you're just looking in international media, you won't pick up anything. So what you have to do is you have to be to the left of the blue line, right? So if your definition includes peaceful protest, you will have to involve local media at least, and probably much of your information will be coming from participants in the events. So social media or other kinds of information will be necessary to pick that up, especially if it's smaller events. If it's large, thousands of people or so, then it may travel further. But for small protests, you will have to go all the way to the participants in all likelihood. So this is what you can capture if you go down, right? So you will capture most of the mass fatality violence, and if you go to local media, you will likely catch most of the low fatality and non-fatality violence, much of it also, and so at least a chunk of the peaceful protests. But even as you just move out to national media, it will be difficult to pick up the peaceful protests. So if you're working in, say, early warning, you really need to go far down. And this is very difficult to do in a global setting, obviously. So just for as a comparison, I think the data that does this best is ACLED for peaceful protest, but even ACLED for that all the way down to local media and also use other kinds of new media will have problem picking up the peaceful protest if they are small. So what I did was I looked at ACLED's peaceful protest in Uppsala for 2020 to 2024, and they pick up 234 peaceful protest events in Uppsala, which is quite impressive. And then I contacted the local police authorities and asked them, how many protests did you register in this period? And it was a bit over 2,000. So ACLED picks up about 11% of the peaceful protest. And Uppsala is kind of an ideal information environment. There's no real censorship. There's a local newspaper, there are local radio stations, there are local TV stations, and people have social media and cell phones and all of that. So it doesn't get much better than that. But even then, it's really hard. So which ones do we pick up, or we, ACLED? Well, 84% of the protests in the ACLED data come from the actors themselves. So it's all the way down on the further left side. So they pick it up from websites by the actors and social media and things like that. And what they pick up is mainly the large organized activist organizations. So 80% almost is Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future. And I imagine it's because they have good PR folks, so they get the information out. Whereas they are not the largest protests in Uppsala during this time. There's like a handful of people that are protesting every Friday at the in a square in Uppsala, and it's like 2 people holding a banderole, and a couple of people handing out flyers, and someone giving a talk. So it's very small, but they're picking it up, and I think it's because they have good PR folks. At the same time, there's also a weekly protest against the events in Gaza, and that involves hundreds of people, often at least 100 people. And there are also protests against Russia's invasion against Ukraine every Monday, and that also involves slightly more people, not quite 100, I think, but maybe 40, 50 people or so on typical Monday. So it's difficult to get a representative picture even using local media. So I think you need to have serious case study work to get further than that, and you will get the slightly skewed picture from even if you're using local media and other types of media, because different organizations are different good at getting their information out there. All right, so that's about the information environment. There are other quirks to the information environment also affects the data, and here unclear information. When you get reports, they don't always tell you how many people are killed. So you have to translate that. So what figure do you, if it's a believable report that says that the vehicle or a tank or a truck or a bus or a house was destroyed, killing the people inside, what number are you going to put on that? And different data collectors have different vague number translators, and that will sometimes, often not make a huge difference, but sometimes it will be very consequential. So for vehicles, and UCDP typically puts 2 if it's people, plural, that are killed inside. Often also, even for a bus, we are very conservative in UCDP. ACLED tends to put the number 10 on many of these cases. And you can see that in the graphs below. The red lines there are sort of vague number translator numbers. So it's 10 or a dozen or 2 dozen, or so those are things that could show up, and you see there's a small peak there at 10. Usually I don't think that makes a huge difference. In individual cases it can make a difference. There's in 2017, I think it was, in Syria, 90% of the or 94% of the difference in the fatality counts between ACLED and UCDP in Syria in 2017 are due to this number. And we have this unclear information problem more in the more intense and difficult to cover conflicts. So it makes a larger difference when the information situation is poorer. Another type of information problem is that as conflicts grow large, information gets aggregated already at the source. And there's little you can do about that as the information collector or the data collector. Because if there is only one clash happening somewhere, it's reported as one clash, and who did what to whom and how many people were killed and so on. And that's a separate event, and so that's easy to locate and characterize by the number of people killed and wounded and things like that. But if you have either a very poor information environment or a very large conflict like Ukraine,
Magnus, you have about 30 seconds remaining, sorry.
Okay, where there are hundreds of these kinds of events, it's difficult, and the different data collectors have different ways of dealing with this. One way is to use summary events, but those are then geographically imprecise placeholders, so it happens somewhere in this district or in this country, and they're temporally imprecise, not necessarily where any exact date. So you have to realize this if you're using it at the this aggregate level. You can't really use the summary events.
Unfortunately, Magnus, I'm going to have to cut you off. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, well, my problem.
But many thanks. If you want to know more, you can of course ask questions in the Q&A to Magnus.